What you're about to hear isn't politics. It's a moment that ripped through the walls of Congress and exposed something most people weren't ready to face. Because when a member of Congress stood up and made one of the boldest moral indictments ever recorded, the entire room froze. The air changed. You could almost feel the collective discomfort of people realizing that the silence they'd kept for years was now being shattered in real time. This wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. And what he said connected everything: power, privilege, and the protection of predators, into one haunting truth that no one could unhear that it started with a story.
4,725 wire transfers. Let me repeat that. 4,725 wire transfers, adding up to nearly $1.1 billion flowing in and out of just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that. So I wrote to the Attorney General, Ms. Bondi, Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times. The Trump commitment to transparency, based on the response, didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request. We thank you for your attention to this important issue. Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand. The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking, but I want it understood as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking. So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand. Have that Treasury information given to the Senate Finance Committee and have us on a bipartisan basis do our work. That's what we do in important investigations. If the Trump people believe they need additional authority to carry out the requests that I make again this afternoon, let me offer to help them write the bill myself. The idea that there is nothing more to investigate, not when you have 4,000 wire transfers, many of them associated with the possibility of wrongdoing and sex traffic promoting. The idea that you have that and there's nothing to investigate when it comes to the Epstein sex trafficking operation is ridiculous. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General in the state of Florida, where a lot of the Epstein crimes were committed. The Attorney General ought to know better, of all people. Mr. President, I can't begin to understand the President's handling of this or why he thinks this is just going to go away. But I'm here to say that our investigators have spent 3 full years looking into this. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly about the horror of sex trafficking and our commitment to root it out. The President of the Senate is new to this body, but I'm sure he's dealt with these issues before. You can't have a much bigger horror in front of you than sex trafficking abuse. So we're talking about real evil done to women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein. And Mr. President, nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. I yield the floor.
But what Senator Ron Wyden revealed wasn't just about Epstein's past. It was about what's still being hidden today. He exposed that Epstein's financial network wasn't just massive, it was global. One account alone showed 4,725 separate wire transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion. And yet, the people who promised transparency, the same ones who once vowed to expose Epstein's secrets, suddenly changed course. They didn't just delay the investigation, they blocked it. And when Wyden demanded to know why, the doors slammed shut. Wyden didn't mince words. He told Congress that somewhere inside the Treasury Department sat a locked cabinet drawer, a file marked Epstein, filled with documents that could blow open one of the most powerful financial networks of the last 2 decades. Inside that file were details of who Epstein paid, who paid him, and which banks handled the transactions. It wasn't just accounting, it was evidence. Evidence of how money flowed from powerful people to a predator, and how the government turned away. These weren't normal transactions. Many of them were linked to foreign banks now under sanctions, Russian institutions, offshore accounts, and other financial shadows. Billions moved quietly, no questions asked. Wyden's team got a brief look at some of the Treasury documents during the previous administration. What they saw was enough to confirm this wasn't speculation. The patterns were there, the money was real, the transfers happened, and yet every request since has been blocked. When Wyden reached out again, this time to the Attorney General, the Treasury Secretary, and the FBI Director, he expected at least a review, maybe a statement, or even partial access. Instead, he got a form letter. The department has previously made documents available relating to the matter. We understand you have the information you seek. In Washington speak, that means go away. It's the bureaucratic way of saying we're not answering that. But this wasn't a question that could be brushed aside. The numbers inside those reports represented real people, victims whose lives were destroyed. Behind every transfer was a connection, a lead, a possible accomplice. To pretend there was nothing to investigate wasn't just disrespectful. It was a choice to protect the powerful and abandon the victims. Wyden wasn't buying it. He went back to the floor of the Senate and made his message unmistakable. You can't call this a hoax when there's over $1 billion of suspicious money sitting in federal records. He reminded the chamber that this wasn't a partisan stunt. It was a matter of law and morality. Because when money like that moves through the global banking system, especially through accounts tied to someone like Epstein, it's not just dirty money. It's evidence of a network. His statement sent shockwaves through Washington, not because of what he accused, but because of what it implied. If those transactions were ever made public, they could expose names, people in politics, finance, entertainment, and beyond who quietly benefited from or enabled Epstein's empire. That's why the fight wasn't just about justice for victims. It was about control. Control of information, control of accountability, control of who the public gets to know. Wyden then turned his attention to one figure in particular, the Attorney General at the time, Pam Bondi. She wasn't just a distant bureaucrat. She had been the Attorney General of Florida, the very state where many of Epstein's original crimes occurred. If anyone should have understood the scale of those atrocities, it was her. And yet, when the files surfaced, when Congress asked for transparency, Bondi refused to hand them over. Wyden made it clear no one, not even a former attorney general, should choose political loyalty over justice for survivors. That moment hit differently, because it wasn't just about one case. It was about the culture of power that allowed Epstein to thrive in the first place. A system that looks away when victims speak up. A system that buries evidence when names get too big. A system that values loyalty more than truth. Then came the revelation that silenced the chamber. Wyden read aloud what the Treasury data actually contained. Thousands of wire transfers, hundreds of millions flowing through Russian banks. Each one a possible link in the chain of trafficking and exploitation. He said plainly that every transfer was a potential lead. Thousands of opportunities for investigators to uncover who funded, enabled, or profited from Epstein's crimes. But instead of acting, the Department of Justice shut down inquiries. Instead of cooperation, the Treasury hid behind excuses. For 3 years, Wyden's team had tracked these movements, following the money that crisscrossed continents. And every time they got close, someone in power found a new way to stall. What's worse, many of the same institutions now calling for accountability were the ones who helped hide the truth back then. Wyden wasn't done. He took his demand one step further. If the Department of Justice refused to investigate, Congress would. He announced he'd personally help write legislation to ensure full access to the Treasury's Epstein file. He called for a bipartisan investigation into every transfer, every bank, every possible connection. He didn't do it for political points. He did it because the story wasn't over and because justice for the victims demanded more than words. This isn't a hoax, he said. This isn't a scam. This is evil and nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. The room was quiet, not because they disagreed, but because they knew what those words meant. If Wyden's investigation continued, it could lead to people in power, people who had something to lose. The most haunting part of Wyden's speech wasn't what he said. It was what he implied, that Epstein didn't act alone. That powerful institutions helped him move money, silence witnesses, and maintain access. And that even after his death, those same systems are still protecting his legacy of secrecy. This wasn't just about one predator. It was about the machinery that enabled him. Every transaction was a clue. Every hidden file, a piece of a larger puzzle. The kind of puzzle that if completed could reveal how money, influence, and power intertwine at the highest levels. Wyden's warning wasn't subtle. If Congress doesn't act now, the evidence could disappear forever. He ended with a promise to keep fighting until the Treasury file is opened, until the truth is public, and until the victims' stories are no longer treated like political inconveniences. Because this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. It's about how the system handles people like him. How it reacts when money and status collide with justice. The same forces that silenced victims years ago are still working today, just wearing different titles. And if no one pushes back, those files will remain locked. Those names will remain hidden, and justice will remain unfinished. This story isn't over. In fact, it might just be beginning. Behind the official denials and bureaucratic phrases lies a paper trail that could rewrite what we think we know about power, corruption, and control. The billion-dollar transfers, the hidden Russian accounts, the blocked congressional requests. All of it points to one thing. There's still a lot someone doesn't want you to see, and that's exactly why this matters. Because until those files are released, the truth stays in the dark. And so does justice. That if you believe transparency should never depend on who's in power, if you think the truth should never be buried, make sure to subscribe, American Debate Files like this video, and stay tuned. We're just getting started.